Well, good evening, everybody. Salam alaikum. Khayla Mamnoon to our guest here for coming. It's a great honor to introduce to you Kasra Naji. I must say, I was in the British Embassy in Tehran, I think perhaps it must have been 2003, and I remember the guys there saying, you know, Hatami, he's really got quite a lot going for him, really. He's a good guy. What a pity he's just got absolutely no power at all. The presidency in Iran is just a completely useless post. And then within, you know, a matter of a few months, you have, or a couple of years at any rate, you get a president that is so apparently powerful that he can bring the Western world to the edge of paroxysms of fear and despair. And it's the same post. But it's a fantastic thing that Kasra has done. He has done an incredible amount of research for this book. And really given an extraordinary amount of detail about who Ahmadinejad actually is, where he came from, who his father was, the blacksmith, the lot. It is an extraordinary piece of work, and it does a great deal to kind of illustrate two things in a way. One, that George Bush met his match. You have two people with a most extraordinarily narrow worldview. And that history will judge as to have been a most unfortunate accident, but that also there is more to Ahmadinejad than immediately meets the eye. My only expertise in being here, besides finally being able to say Khayla Mamnoon, is in fact that I had the good fortune to meet the great man, the president, some few weeks back when I had to interview him in Tehran. He is very small, but he's very interesting, and he does something that most British politicians and American politicians do not do, and that is he actually addresses the question you ask him. You may not like the answer, but he does address the very question you've asked him. But anyway, we will learn very, very much more about Ahmadinejad. I'm wondering, Kasri, who has worked for the FT, the Guardian, the Los Angeles Times, CNN, BBC, everybody except Channel 4 News, but that's going to change. But he's now resident in London, and it says rather cryptically on the back of the book, who moved to London shortly after completing this book. And I'm wondering whether to have stayed would have been slightly dicey.
I've given up actually predicting how they're going to react to this. They may like it, they may hate it, they may be happy with it, even they might be angry. I've given up. And the fact that I moved to London, it had nothing to do with that. I was in Iran because my wife was there. She's a BBC correspondent. She came to the end of her stint. I was freelancing. It was the end of the line for us in Tehran. We had to basically move back to London, where it's basically its home. We've been away from London for the last 12, 13 years, living in Asian countries mostly. And now it was a time to come back. Has nothing to do with the actual book, although that statement is factually correct. I moved here after completing the book.
Well, it gives a certain electricity to the sales push.
I bet.
But quite seriously, this is not an authorized biography, but it is a balanced account of him. I mean, it's not an assault on him.
It's not meant to be. It's meant to be an introduction to this person who's very enigmatic, who has come from nowhere. In fact, when he got elected, we all were in Iran, journalists who were in Iran, we all got it wrong. Embassies got it wrong. Nobody expected this man to win the elections, and he did. And he did with the landslide victory there. And, you know, and then the way he operated in power as president was fascinating. The stuff he came up with, the whole thing about the Holocaust, the Israeli line, all that stuff was basically very new to Iran. It came from out of nowhere. It's not within the politics of the Iranian revolutionary regime to come up with that kind of thing. He created that. So he had, I thought this man has something that other people didn't have before him. It's somebody to actually sort of figure out who he is, what's actually making him tick. And also, another reason for writing
let me
this
just pause you for a moment, because you just mentioned the Holocaust and the Israeli stuff. But Khomeini actually had said he was actually quoting Khomeini on some of the things which he said, including references to Israel and the Holocaust.
That statement that he came up with, Israel should be wiped off the map, or something to that effect, depending on which translation you use and whether you can. If we accept that this is what he said, was more or less, not more or less, in fact, exactly what Khomeini had said some 25 years earlier. And Khomeini's statement didn't make that much of a wave in Iran or abroad, in fact. Nobody took notice of it. There were reasons for it. One is that Iran was in the midst of a revolutionary turmoil, a lot bigger than anything, and everyone was focusing on what is happening in Iran rather than this particular statement. It didn't make the headlines. Khomeini himself wasn't the head of state or anybody. He was a leader of a revolution of kind that had no sort of executive power to begin with. And at the time, Israelis were still hoping that they will have normal relations with post-revolutionary Iran. So they didn't make a fuss about this. So it just sort of nobody took notice, basically.
Why don't we, before, I'm going to open it out to the floor, obviously, in about 20 minutes or so, but I want to try and just explore a few things about the book first. But let's just, even before we get to the book, it's an impossible thing to do in a few sentences, but let us just place the presidency in the pyramid that is power in Iran. Greatest power comes to rest in the supreme leader. How many now? Khomeini then. The president is down here, elected directly by the people. He was picked because he wasn't a mullah. I mean, the other three candidates were mullahs, were they not?
The candidates in the presidential elections, no, some
were not. But he was thought to be the least religious, wasn't he, or not?
He was the most religious.
But he turned out, of course, to be the most religious.
And I think a lot of people voted for him because he was not a clergyman. And those people who were tired of clergymen ruling Iran and the mess that they had made in their views of the situation in Iran. And some people obviously voted for him because he was a layman. He was not a cleric.
But he turned out to be much more clerical than the clerics.
Oh,
I thought there was a wonderful account here.
Than many of these mullahs you see in Iran and clerics you see.
There was a wonderful account of how he got women watching football wrong. Just tell us that bit. Because I was there for the World Cup match against Costa Rica, a celebrated game of football, if ever I saw one. And I saw women being beaten up outside the football ground for trying to go and see it.
Right.
Because he had actually thought, as an ex-footballer himself, that he could placate. Tell us.
I think it's part of his populism, actually. He wanted to reach out to a broader cross-section of people, including women, at this time, he thought. And it was just before the World Cup in Germany. And of course, you know, football was in everyone's mind at the time. And there was also an Iranian film that had come out at the time by this famous Iranian director. I can't remember the title of the book. Offside. And the book, the film was basically about how unjust was the whole business of preventing women from attending sports games, including football. So it was very much topical. At the time, I thought, in my book, I have a basic impression was that he thought that he could change this and with one stroke win a lot of votes from women voters that he wouldn't otherwise. And he decided that, yes, why not? They can come into the stadium so long as they don't mix with women, because the clergymen in Rome are going to be objecting to that. That's not allowed. So why don't we give part of the stadium, one of the stands, to women so that they can be separate from men? And in this way we can sort out the problem. And of course he was very wrong. He misread the whole reaction from Rome, from religious leaders, including his own mentor, Ayatollah Yazdi, who's a hardline cleric in Rome, and they all objected to it in very strong terms, and he had to basically back down.
That then takes us to this question of how he is viewed by the Supreme Leader.
Supreme Leader, I think my own impression is that at the time of the election, Supreme Leader wasn't quite sure what kind of a quantity this man was, what kind of a character this man was. Didn't have that much of knowledge or recognition of this man. And later on, he warmed up to him after he was elected. And I remember the first meeting between the two, the official meeting, the swearing-in ceremony. Ayatollah Khomeini's speech endorsing his election was very cautious, wasn't a full support. And he was basically saying in his speech that if you stick to your promises in the elections, we will support you, kind of thing.
Well, it's the nuclear... Yeah, keep going.
But then things moved on in a sense that Ayatollah Khomeini, in my view, realized that Ahmadinejad could do the legwork for him, all the things that Ayatollah Khomeini wanted to do over the years and couldn't do because of the reformists in power, President Khatami and all that, Ahmadinejad could do. So it's a relationship, both need each other. In my view, Ahmadinejad needs the support of Khomeini to stay in power, to continue to stay in power, and Khomeini needs him to make sure that, you know, all the things that he wanted to do over the years can be done.
So let's get to the nuclear issue, which in a sense has taken us to the brink, though we think we've stepped back from the brink because the intelligence community in Washington has suddenly thought it didn't want to be wrong twice too badly, and has clearly decided to clear the decks before anybody decides to go fighting. Who is in charge of the nuclear? The Supreme Leader, fundamentally?
Fundamentally, the Supreme Leader. Ahmadinejad has taken over the day-to-day running of the policy and being a spokesman for it.
And yet, Larijani, who had the job as being the lead operative and was secretary to the very powerful National Security Council, got pushed out, even though he was Khamenei's man.
Yeah.
That was a power struggle which Ahmadinejad won.
It was a power struggle that he won, and in my view, that incident was the reflection of how the whole regime was under pressure from the Americans, from the rest of the world, to do something about this nuclear issue, and the cracks were showing, the strains were showing. Larijani wanted to push a softer line, a more sort of line conducive to talks, to negotiations, rather than outright rejection that Ahmadinejad was pushing. And Ahmadinejad basically pushed that aside, pushed him aside, to the point that Larijani could not sort of, it was untenable for him to continue.
So where do we find Ahmadinejad on the matter of the bomb? He wants his people to think they're building one. He thinks they're building one. They are building one. They're not building one at all.
Excuse me, let me put this back on. The NIE report, the National Intelligence Estimate that came out in November, the American, which is a consensus of the views of the American intelligence agencies, basically says that Iran in 2003 stopped work on developing nuclear warheads. This is what it essentially says. It doesn't say that they stopped the nuclear weapons program or anything. They stopped nuclear warhead production. The fact is that the enrichment continues today. The fact is that they are continuing to develop their missile technology, and that NIE report basically says that they don't know whether since 2003 they have resumed working on this project or not.
But they don't actually know whether there's ever been a project.
They say with high confidence that in 2003 that particular project stopped.
But they don't ever say when it began, if it ever did begin.
No, they don't know.
It sounds quite Iranian in a way.
You know, and on the whole, my own impression is that the line in Tehran is that they want to go all the way to attaining and the capability to produce a nuclear weapon if and when they want to do that.
What about the fatwa? There is a fatwa against building a bomb, isn't there?
Allegedly. I've never seen the fatwa in
I haven't
print.
either, I must admit. No.
It's not there. I haven't seen it. And these fatwas can change with circumstances. If circumstances change, the fatwa can change. I think Iranians are very mindful of their position towards the end of Iran-Iraq war. They were not doing very well at all. The whole international community had ganged up against Iran, supporting Saddam at the time, and Iranians were losing heart. They didn't have the money to push the war. They couldn't buy armaments. The people had lost interest in going to the fronts. So basically things were pretty bad. And they have learned their lesson. If they come into that to that kind of a situation again, they need some kind of a deterrence. My own view is that they are going to go all the way to the point where they have the capability, not necessarily actually producing it, building the bomb, but having the capability to do so if they need to do so.
I mean, the amazing thing is your book comes right up to the present day. I mean, in September, you're writing and setting out what's going on. Ahmadinejad can be said to be both the great survivor and the comeback kid. I mean, he was very nearly dismasted, and there was a move, wasn't there, to shorten his term, to review when the election should be again, possibly even this year. He saw it off.
There's been quite a bit of opposition to his style of management, his style of ruling the country, and all sorts of pressures on him to go or to shorten his term of office. But he stayed there. He will stay there so long as Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, supports him. That's my view. He's got very important supporters in the hierarchy of power in Iran. He has the Revolutionary Guards supporting him. He has Ayatollah Khomeini supporting him. He has the Guardian Council, which is overseeing elections in Iran, supporting.
And you don't mention Dick Cheney, who's been his best friend for office, really, because the thing, I think maybe you would agree, that one of the things you find in Iran is that whenever the heat gets hot outside, whenever the political heat piles on, however reluctantly, people feel they're Iranian first, and they're not prepared to tolerate the awful pressures from outside, and will rally to whoever's there in the feeling that at that point the most important thing is to stick with what they've got.
I think so. I think when it came a few months ago, when the pressure for a war, or it looked likely that it looked incredibly close to the beginning of a war on Iran, my own reading was, and still is, that is the biggest mistake, in a sense that it's going to rally Iranians behind a very unpopular regime. And Ahmadinejad knows that. In fact, this is one of his calculations, that he believes that sooner or later Iran and America are going to come to blows, and if there's going to be a war, what better issue to fight it over other than this nuclear thing, which has a broad support within Iran.
Well, in a second I'm going to go to the audience, but there is something interesting about him. He had an interesting tenure as mayor of Tehran. He sorted out the traffic to some extent, not that anybody's ever quite sorted out the traffic in Tehran, but he also had some imaginative plans and programs for heroin addicts, of whom there are quite humane projects, which suggests that he's not the idiot the West would like to portray him, and indeed your book doesn't leave you thinking he is an idiot, but that he does come from very simple beginnings and has a very simple, narrow worldview.
He's a very political animal, everything he did during his term of office as mayor was politically motivated. He wanted to make sure that he would use the considerable resources of Tehran's municipality and the mayor's office to gain support from various sections in the society, and he did that quite cleverly. At the same time, as you say, he managed to come up with ideas that improved slightly the situation of traffic in Tehran. But after all, he's got a PhD in traffic management.
Which is well exercised in naval traffic management, as we've also seen. Well, who would like to set the ball rolling? I've done a very broad brush with Kasra, the Kasra. There are a lot of issues that we can explore in more depth. Yes, at the back. There's going to be a mic coming your way, because they record this set down in black and white, and it's then studied by the same intelligence assessment organization that has passed judgment on the Iranian.
My name's Dariush Barzag, I'm from the BBC, and I've actually read your book, and I thought one of the interesting things that you brought out was that although he might seem like the Americans' nightmare, Ahmadinejad is well placed, would like to be the person who breaks the deadlock between the two countries, and that it is only someone from the extreme right who could ever negotiate terms with the United States, and albeit in his own haphazard way, with his letters to Bush and his appearance at that university and his two strange appearances at the UN. I mean, he's travelled as president to America twice. The talks in Iraq happened on his watch. None of this has happened under the reformists. So that's the other side that you brought out, and I think that's maybe one of the most interesting things. If Bush or this man was to pull something historic out of the hat in the next 2 years, and it's not going to be nuclear Armageddon, maybe it would be a reconciliation.
He would like to talk to Obama.
Or Obama wants to talk to him.
Yeah, but I mean, he wouldn't reject it if Obama said yes.
Probably not, knowing Ahmadinejad. It gets a lot of publicity. He would like that. Yes, I mean, this is part of the contradiction that you see in this man, and this man is full of it, actually. On one side, he thinks that it is just possible that he can break the deadlock in the Iran-US relations, and if that deadlock could be broken, then he wants to be the man who has done it. He wants that credit for himself. But at the same time, he also has been telling people close to him that he believes that Iran and the US are inevitably coming to a war sooner or later, and that we have to prepare ourselves for that day. So there you are. It's both sides. At the same time, he wants to be positive. At the same time, he sees that there's no opening or no chance of improving relations.
Yet at the same time, he has absolutely no awareness that in being a Holocaust denier, he makes it absolutely factually impossible for somebody in the White House to talk to him.
Yes, has absolutely no idea of the significance of what he brought up in terms of Holocaust or things that he did subsequently on that.
Did you discover whether he'd read any books of any interest?
He says he has. A, and B, he has this man, Mr. Ramin, who is his advisor on issues to do with the Holocaust, and he is, of course, a Holocaust denier to the core. So I shudder to think, what he tells the president and what kind of things, what advice he gives him.
He might well have been the agent of the original statement.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Wait a minute, microphone coming.
Hi, I'm a journalist for Gulf States newsletter. What do you think about the tensions between Khomeini and Ahmadinejad regarding the Imam Mahdi and his return and
Khomeini, you said. Ayatollah Khomeini.
Yeah.
Khomeini.
Khomeini, right.
And And also, you mentioned three supporters of Ahmadinejad. You mentioned three supporters: the Revolutionary Guard, the Guardian Council, and the
Iran Supreme Leader. And there are a few more.
Are there any more supporters that we should know about? And also, from 2005, are there any supporters he's lost, throughout his presidency?
Last point first, he lost the support of a lot of Iranian voters who voted for him. And he lost that mainly because of the situation of the economy, the rising prices, the fact that he had promised to bring the oil money to the people's dinner tables, and he didn't. And in fact, not only he didn't do that, things got out of hand in terms of prices, the housing prices, the food prices. So he lost a lot of support of those people who actually voted for him. The people who actually support him, the most important, of course, is the Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Khomeini. As long as he supports him, Ahmadinejad, in my view, is safe. But he also has sections of the Revolutionary Guards. He has almost all of the Basij. He has the Guardian Council and its leader, Ayatollah Jannati, who is a hard-line, right-wing Ayatollah of considerable influence in Iran. And he also has Ayatollah Mesbah-Yazdi in Rome, who has himself is not all that important in the big scheme of things, but he basically is the mentor to a whole groups of clergymen who are in Iran today, who have positions of power and here and there, and he has, of course, their support too. So as long as he's got these, the support of these people, I think he's pretty safe, actually, where he is. As to the Mahdi, there's no tension as such. It's just Ahmadinejad's view of Imam Mahdi, which is the missing Imam, the 12th Imam of the Shiites, who went into hiding some 800 years ago with the promise to come back and establish peace and justice. There's no tension there between the two. It's
but he did think that standing in the United Nations General Assembly, that when the sun shone through the windows and lit up, that he felt the aura that the 12th Imam was present. That surely can't have gone down too well, can it?
It didn't, but the lady was referring to tension between him and Ayatollah Khomeini, not other people in Rome, and that particular statement. That particular statement didn't go down too well in Rome or anywhere else, actually. He became the subject of many jokes after that.
But he sincerely believed it.
He did.
He didn't make that up.
He does believe that kind of thing.
That is a bit worrying, isn't it?
It's worrying. He genuinely believes that Mahdi is coming anytime soon, very soon. In fact, on his swearing-in ceremony, when he became president, he turned around afterwards in a small chit-chat, turned around to Ayatollah Khomeini and said, "Oh, I think I will hand in power to the Mahdi before my term of office is over." And Ayatollah Khomeini was amused, turning around saying that, what if he doesn't turn up? Apparently, according to people who were present and then relayed it, he turns around and says, no, I sincerely believe he will come soon. He said very odd things about it.
Well, it's quite possible George Bush believes the second coming will come quite soon. There are quite a lot of fundamentalist Americans who believe the second coming is coming soon. So it's easy for us to ridicule this, but it's quite a mainstream feeling that something big.
I don't know how mainstream it is in the US, but it's not mainstream in Iran. Even this, in Iran, where it's ruled by the clergy, this kind of view is not mainstream. In fact, it was very new when he came to power. He started promoting the idea of Mahdi. It was pretty new to people.
But it's rather interesting, therefore, that in such a clerical state, where such a neo-blasphemous thing could almost be asserted, that he'd appeared at the United Nations, right? That he recovered enough still to enjoy the confidence of the Supreme Leader.
You mean by bringing out this?
Yeah, I mean, it was a very strange statement, wasn't it?
What, the Mahdi?
The UN belief that he had stood while making his speech and 12th Imam was present.
You mean?
Yeah, the halo.
The halo. The halo was very odd, and people, even these ayatollahs in Rome, I think one of the ayatollahs turned around to him when he said this, turned around saying that I hope you will continue working on your promises to the people when you were campaigning as president. Go back to the things.
This is what makes him such an absolutely fascinating subject for a book, because your book has a lot of logical progression. It's not as if he's an illogical candidate. He's not. He's somebody who makes a journey that you can fully understand. You can see why he was attractive to voters in that time, and you can see what his strengths and weaknesses were in a temporal sense. And then you get walloped by the Holocaust, by the 12th Imam, and you wonder whether the guy stepped out of an asylum. I mean, this is the extraordinary multifaceted
nature. You do
wonder
about that sometimes. On this question of Mahdi, I remember he made a speech in Kerman in southern Iran, and he told his audiences that the American forces in Iraq were going door to door, asking people about the whereabouts of the Mahdi because they wanted to prevent him from re-emerging. And he said he had the intelligence to do this and all that. And he repeated this again in some other speech. And you think to yourself, where does this come from? And it's not normal in a normal sense from people, from normal perspective of ordinary people, that this kind of thing is being pushed.
Could you argue then that American pressure has in fact reduced the effect of those sort of statements, which might have made him a figure of fun, and that in a sense, given that he's the elected leader, people have very little other place to go, and the more the pressure built, the more people had to rally to the sane element of Ahmadinejad and forget the rather extreme
I'm not sure.
statement.
I don't know how much American pressure had to do with that. The fact was that he was the president of the country. Iranians were stuck with him, and the fact that Iran's supreme leader was supporting him at every turn made him pretty safe in his place, and the Iranians didn't really have that much choice anyway.
Other questions? Yes, right over there on the side, the microphone's coming over.
Hi. I would like to, I'm a little confused about who holds really the power in Iran, because it's supposed to be the supreme leader who has the absolute power, but who appoints Larijani for the secretary of the Security Council, but at the same time, Ahmadinejad has the power to dismiss him. So I'm a little bit confused about that. And you mentioned that he's lost many of his supporters. So I was wondering, regardless of what Guardian Council is doing for the next election, which is coming up in March, do you think that people will vote for the reformers?
Would they vote for the reformers? It's a difficult one to say. The fact is, my own view of the elections is that the people who are in power now, Ahmadinejad, the hardliners, Guardian Council, they have come to win a couple of elections in the past few years. And after several elections, they lost to the reformists. My own impression is that, come what may, they're not going to allow reformists back into power. The reformist era, as far as they are concerned, is over. By hook or crook, this is not going to happen. Reformists are, at most, in my view, are going to have a token presence in the Iranian parliament, and hardliners will dominate as they have done in the present parliament.
And the power?
The power, Iran is a very complex place, this power structure. You have many centers of power, really, in Iran, and each power exerts considerable amount of power. On the whole, Ayatollah, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khomeini has the complete control, if you like. But, for example, the example of Larijani, he was actually nominated by a Supreme Leader, but appointed by the President. That post is a post that is appointed by the President. So President technically can take it away. And this is what happened. Although it didn't happen that way, Larijani basically resigned. And
then Khomeini reappointed him as his representative on the National Security Council and got him to attend every negotiation of the nuclear negotiating committee. So there again you see this strange balance of power.
Yes, but at the same time, Larijani is no longer the spokesperson of this particular council that was leading the negotiations with the Europeans. And that's important for Ahmadinejad, because Larijani was going around talking about talks, negotiations and all that, giving the impression that there is another way of resolving this. And this wasn't Ahmadinejad's line. Ahmadinejad didn't want to have anything to do with that kind of a talk of compromise, if you like.
Yeah.
Thanks. I just want to ask you another question about the role of the US in Ahmadinejad and Ahmadinejad's support base. So you said a bit earlier that there's been not very much support for reform within Iran as long as Washington's applying the pressure, and that Ahmadinejad's done quite a lot in a way to keep the pressure applied so that he maintains his support base. But what America really wants is reform in Iran, so perhaps it's true that Washington's belligerent rhetoric at the moment is actually strengthening the cause against reform, which would suggest, if you think that this is right, that they need to adopt a new approach. So what do you think about that? What do you think the role that America has played so far in Iran? Do you think it's kind of consistent with American foreign policy, or do you think they need to adopt a new approach? And if they do need to adopt a new approach, what do you think that approach should look like?
I really don't have the answer to that question. I don't know what the West or the Americans should do vis-a-vis Iran. I really don't know. I don't know whether any of these suggestions that are being put forward by various people in the media and elsewhere are going to work.
Do you think, I mean, my sense, having been there, and you lived there, so you know much better than I did, but my sense is that the United States has never accepted the revolution. And, I mean, they resent the revolution, and they've never really worked out how to accommodate it. And consequently, there was a rare moment when Madeleine Albright briefly looked at apologizing for Mossadegh, apologizing for, this was for the overthrow of Mossadegh, and apologizing even for elements of the hostage drama. But then it retreated again. But generally speaking, it seemed to me always, whenever I've been there, that the United States has never really worked from the basis that the Islamic Revolution is a fact, and we have to work forward from that position. No, they say it's not democratic, it wasn't the will of the people, even though millions of people were on the streets. You know, and we've never, the British have a more, you know, British kind of way of kind of resenting it but accepting it and even enjoying it and then analyzing it, but in a sense when you talk to Iranian leaders, they don't want to talk to the British, they don't want to talk to anybody, not even Sarkozy. They want to talk to the Americans, and the Americans won't talk to them. And it seems to me that nothing will ever happen until somebody very, very important steps off a plane at Mehrabad Airport, or whatever the new one is prepared to offer, and shakes hands and goes and talks.
They have a problem with Iran. And the problem starts with the hostage-taking issue in 1980. So for the Americans, the revolution and the hostage-taking are more or less concurrent. So their view of the revolution begins with the issue of hostage-taking, and that has left a big scar on the Americans vis-a-vis Iran, and hasn't been helpful at all. And as you say, that has led to the situation that they never accepted this revolution anyway. And the Iranians, because of that hostage-taking issue, they went into political wilderness. That is they still are there today.
They've only ever had 20 years of diplomatic relations with Iran ever in history. So it's not a natural story.
No.
Anybody? Yeah, yeah.
Just a question on the wider regional front and the President's diplomacy within the region. He recently was invited for the Hajj, an unprecedented invite for the Iranian President himself. Recently invited for an unprecedented meeting, or rather the Gulf Cooperation Summit, is about to re-establish relations, rather negotiated, with Egypt, another unprecedented move under the Islamic Republic. Recently recalled the Iranian ambassador to Syria at the behest of the Syrians, and solidified Iran's relations with Syria. All these sort of little nuances. Visited Bahrain recently too, another unprecedented visit. Iran's foreign policy in the region isn't doing too badly under Ahmadinejad, is it?
Whether something is coming out of these visits, I'm not sure. The fact is, what Iran is doing in the region is dictated, but by what the Americans are doing in the region. Americans want the regional countries, the Arab countries in the Gulf and beyond, to isolate Iran, to have nothing to do with Iran, to support an American aggression against Iran if it comes to that. Basically, support increased pressure on Iran. Ahmadinejad and people in Iran know this, and they want to counter this. And so the idea is to build bridges with the Arab countries, the countries in the Middle East, in the Gulf, to counter this American policy there. My own impression is that he has a personal chemistry that he has developed with the Saudi king, and invitation for him to go to Hajj came out of that kind of a chemistry that they have managed to strike. His visit to Qatar and this Gulf Cooperation Council, I think it was his suggestion rather than their suggestion. It came from him, his idea, and it wasn't very well thought through either, because the Gulf Cooperation Council doesn't believe in, to begin with, the Gulf Cooperation Council, not the Persian Gulf Cooperation Council, which is a basically very sensitive issue in Iran. And he didn't get much out of that trip and visit. Bahrain also, the same issue. He's trying, and the Iranians are trying to build bridges, Americans are trying to break them, so it goes on.
But I think Kasra has said a very, very important thing, which is that this whole business that Iranian foreign policy is really dictated by trying to find ways to upset the United States. I mean, the whole Hezbollah, the whole origin of the support for these groups, in which there were never naturally affinities in the very beginning, is an extraordinary account of looking for areas that will really upset the Americans. And my belief is that even the Holocaust statement was something he knew but didn't really calculate would have. He didn't realize it would offend the whole world, but he thought it would particularly offend the United States. And I'm sure that a lot of what he says and a lot of what Iran does is deliberately to get back at the United States, and is something which comes from this void of non-relating. Because something which people don't, I think, often think about is that when sanctions are discussed, for example, America's had sanctions on Iran ever since 1979, and, for example, all the oil well equipment, which was all American, all the valves, all the technology, all the screw systems and the nuts and the bolts were supplied by the United States. And Iran has had to manufacture phony versions of this, none of which work terribly well. And they have, I'm giving you in microcosm, but these things can be seen right through the Boeing aircraft, the lot. Everything was dependent because the whole construct was an American economic model, which is completely stymied by those sanctions. And I think you see this conversation, this non-conversation, in which America doesn't speak and Iran only speaks in this very counter kind of way. It is a fascinating game of chess. And I would like to make one prophecy to you, and that is that in this very weird situation in that region, one day, maybe within 2 decades, you will see a new relationship evolve, which will link India, mainly Hindu India, with Iran, and even through to Israel. It's possible to see a commonality of interest against Sunni Arabi that could well bring these countries together. And people think you're completely mad as Ahmadinejad to say such a thing. But when you're there, I mean, this is such a bright and wonderful and vibrant population that brings so much to the table. The idea that it's going to be excluded for generations to come is just madness. Madness. They're the most brilliant force in that part of the world by a very long margin. I mean, it's not the fault of an essentially desert people that surround them, the Saudis and the rest of it, but the fact is they have a civilization that goes back 3,000 years, as indeed, or 8,000 years, as the Iraqis do too. But then you push out beyond that and you find people who do not have the gifts that the Persians enjoy. I'm a Persianophile. Yeah. Yeah, you first and then...
Okay. John, you mentioned about the vibrant population, but Kasra, how has life changed significantly for the general population under Ahmadinejad?
I think
and if so, how?
I think they're worse off. Economically has gone down. I went to the village he was born, and the village is about 2 hours drive east of Tehran. And it's a very dusty, depressed village. There's hardly any sort of young people there. There's no job. The shops are closed. That kind of a scene you see there. And people there was telling me that even this is the village he comes from. He still has relatives there. This is, you know, the place you would expect a great deal of support for the man. And there wasn't any. People were angry. Prices had gone up, and these people on the edge of the desert, you know, they can hardly sort of make $2 a day, and with these prices going up, it's a huge problem for Ahmadinejad. And this is a place he didn't visit. He didn't manage to bring the oil money to their tables as he had promised. I talked to this man, a tailor in a shop. He was telling me that, you know, what has he done for us? Nothing. The oil money is not there. And in his words, even he, the villager, you know, on the edge of the desert, he was telling me that this man's tongue is too short. He shouldn't talk like this. He's the president of the country, and blah, blah. So, you know, people are pretty worse off. And there's a rationing of petrol these days in the 4th largest producer of oil in the land. You know, the mismanagement of the economy is colossal. Yeah, it's lost a lot of that support.
And that doesn't even include the question of human rights, the repression of women, well, which is something which comes in bursts, but it's there.
It's there, and it's getting worse, yes.
And
first, Mr. Snow, thank you for the Persian words that you said. Maybe occasionally you could close your program with those.
I have deployed Khaila Mamnoon on the air, and even Khadafis in a moment of temper.
Thank you. The previous conversation leads me straight to my question: how far does he run a risk of the current economic situation in Iran which is, in fact, as you've described it, extremely volatile, causing eventually an uproar which hopefully, possibly, could lead to a change of dramatic proportions?
Yes and no. Yes, economically, he mismanaged the country in a massive way. But he's lucky also. The prices of oil have gone up to $100 a barrel these days. He's getting a lot of oil money that he can play around with, offset part of the impact of the mismanagement and also the impact of the sanctions that were already in place against Iran by the UN and the Americans. So he's been lucky on that front. He's got money to spend. And one of the things he does, he's genuinely popular with the rural people in villages, in remote areas, is that he goes to these places regularly and he spends a lot of money on these places. And so, okay, in Tehran, in places, people complaining about, prices, about mismanagement of the economy, about various aspects of human rights and all that. But to the rural people, they are being looked after by this man. There's no doubt about it. He goes to these places that even journalists have to look up on the map to see where he's speaking today, because we don't know that kind of where that place is. Is how remote these places are. He goes, he makes speeches, he promises bridges, he promises roads, he promises drinking water, he promises them this, that, the other, and he delivers some of them at least. I'm not sure what percentage. There's a debate about, what percentage of these promises are actually kept. But at least a percentage is kept, and that's something if you're living in the middle of nowhere, in the back of beyond, with no hope at all, and suddenly the president of countries comes to your village and promises X, Y, and Z.
Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering to what extent you think he's pursued a kind of deliberate strategy of sort of making Iran and himself a kind of pan-Islamic leader, and also a sort of anti-American, putting himself at the front of a kind of anti-American tide. I mean, a lot of the things that he said, which obviously a lot of people in the West find quite appalling, are nonetheless things that have been said on the Muslim street, if you like, for a very long time, and he's the first leader, political leader, who's actually articulated this from a position of, official kind of stature and power, and that has actually made him into a very kind of potent figure outside of Iran, with Muslim populations. I mean, I travel in countries where taxi drivers rave about, even, Somali taxi drivers in London rave about Ahmadinejad. So, I'm just wondering to what extent that's been a deliberate...
Oh, it's deliberate, all right.
Back to the beginning of the revolution, rather than just something accidental.
It's deliberate, all right, and it goes back to Khomeini days. Khomeini's idea was that if this revolution was going to survive, it has to export itself to other countries, to spread its tentacles in all sorts of places, particularly in Muslim and Arab countries. And this is the line that the Iranian hardliners have been pushing, this idea of creating Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. They have their client groups in various countries. Is part of that strategy. And generally the idea is that whatever they do, they want to counter the U.S. Influence, and they want to appear to be the banner holders of anti-Americanism in the region, and they know that given all this situation that we see today with the administration in Washington, there is quite a bit of anti-Americanism in the whole region, and he's banking on that. He travels to these places, and he wants to be out there, and they make sure that they are paying attention to those people. They invite their journalists, they invite their university professors, all sorts of people regime. It's a deliberate policy. It's part of that. They want to make sure that they have their support outside Iran amongst the Arab and Muslim populations. If the Iranians don't support them outside Iran, they do.
In the extreme corner there.
Coming back to the previous question and I guess the speculation of how this regime might one day perhaps be thrown over or you know, put away with. I understand that the population of Iran is 50% or 60% below 30 years of age, and so there's a tremendous demographic pressure, I would say, that's kind of building up. And if you look at young people in the West and throughout the world, sort of the connection with religion being less and less in Western societies in particular, but you know, potentially also there. Is there a theory that one could develop out of this, that over time, with all these young people sort of moving up the demographic ladder, that you know, at some point this whole religious structure is just going to explode and just be put away with demographic pressure?
There is that pressure. A good deal of Iranians are under 30. It's a very young population, and these people are arriving at the job market in their tens of thousands, if not millions, every year, and is seeing to their at least job needs is a serious problem for any government in Iran, particularly this government with its mismanagement of the economy. So on the whole, the outlook doesn't look too good from the regime's point of view, in a sense that you have all these young people who have aspirations to be young, to do things and all that, and to have jobs, to have future, and they don't see that. It's very sad, actually. A lot of young people you talk to in Iran, they don't see any future for themselves. They want to go out of Iran. There's a general tendency to escape if they can, and those people who are inside Iran remaining, the young people, they very depressed about the whole situation, and I'm sure this is going to increase pressure on the clerical regime in Iran to do something about it. They cannot go on. What we see today is the reverse. In fact, what the young people want is the opening of social barriers and the atmosphere. And what we see with Ahmadinejad and the hardliners in power today is that they're closing it in. So it's a good thing to watch. It's a dangerous thing for them.
But at the same time, it is an extraordinary thing that yet again you can see the failure of Western policy, because undoubtedly the thing which would put most pressure on the regime would in fact be massive economic engagement. I've always said that what the West needs to do is to carpet bomb Iran with laptops, and I mean genuinely open up the whole of the kind of oil infrastructure opportunities, trade. I mean, absolutely go hell for leather, get them into the World Trading Organization, open every possible tariff barrier, give them new planes, you know, let them into every single market from which they're banned, even the scientifically dodgy, and the effect would be absolutely uncontrollable. The mullahs would be flat on their backs as the hordes ran across their ample stomachs, surging for the trading opportunities and the rest of it. No, you may think it's mad, but when you're there, there are so many people, particularly if you go to the universities, that you can see are capable of immediately grasping. They're entrepreneurs, they're ready for it. And so you have these young, very well-educated people very often, particularly in the cities, who've been to good universities, taught by quite good academics. And you know, the other thing is you talk about the religion and the rest of it, but to the outsider, and I'm a complete ignoramus here, but to an outsider who operates in both Sunni and Shia lands, there's something very mellow about aspects of Shiadom, something quite compatible at times. People obviously make a lot of the flagellation and all the rest of it, but actually the mullah in the minaret is a much less intrusive figure than in a Sunni domain. And the potential is massive. I would say engage in Iranian futures right now while stocks last. You think I'm mad?
No, that's one thing that I tend to agree with, although I'm not sure whether it will work in the end.
Well, no, I don't know that either. People might get killed by the laptops.
I was in Vietnam. I was in Vietnam several months ago, and interesting to see how that strategy is working in Vietnam, in a sense that you know, you don't see much sign of communism except these big posters you see here and there.
It seeped away.
But in Iran, I'm sort of, I don't know whether that will work in the end.
The Revolutionary Guard are a serious stumbling block. I mean, they are really wild people.
Wild people. Ayatollah Khomeini himself is very cautious about this. I'm not sure whether he will allow this to happen.
We're under a bit of pressure. We've got 3 questions here, which I'm going to take all 3, and then I think we've more or less had it. 1, 2, 3, 4. The BBC man at the back will take one small because he asked such an interesting question in the first place. You had your hand up, didn't you? Yeah, yeah.
I've just been in Iran myself for 3 months, and I have to say I don't think that this regime is going anywhere, really. It's because it's not just a regime, it's a system which operates on so many levels with the bureaucracy and all of these things that people have to interact with just to get things done. But as for the future, I think there's 2 models that they're looking at. One is China, where you still have the Communist Party in charge, can make as much money as you want, but ideologically there's red lines, and you know when to cross them and not. And I think SEPA is very interested, the Revolutionary Guard is very interested in how the security structures of the old Soviet Union privatized themselves and basically made a move wherein their power is now sort of in transnational capital rather than communist ideology, but it's the same guys in charge. You know, I mean, look who Putin is. He was the head of a KGB, voted in twice since the changeover. I think that those are the 2 models that this setup of people is looking at, and for those reasons I don't think that the regime will change. Also, there's people there who are prepared to kill to keep that regime in power. I have lots of young Iranian friends. I don't know any of them prepared to go out and die for their iPod.
This model, Chinese model, may have been a model for the reformists in Iran when they were in power. It certainly isn't a model for Ahmadinejad and the hardliners today. Ahmadinejad's idea of economic development is something like a command economy of the former Soviet Union. And that's his idea of how he should run the economy, not the Chinese model. That's my view of it. But as I say, the young people are, they are in a difficult position. There's no hope, actually. Few of them see any future for themselves.
Let me take these last 3 together, and then I'll get a final word from Kasra. So one down here and one at the back there.
Hi. I think it's easy to lambast George Bush in terms of kind of policy interventionism and kind of problems with Iraq. But do you really see a fundamental change in policy depending on, you know, whether Republicans or Democrats get in? When you've got McCain, Romney coming out and saying, you know, they'll strike against Iran. You've even got Obama saying he favours surgical missile strikes against Iran. Just in terms of the actual fundamental relationship between the US and Iran, do you really see a difference, you know, depending on Democrats or Republicans? Because Iran has been the kind of key foreign policy issue, you know, vis-a-vis Iraq or something.
We'll hold that question and just take the last in the turquoise sweater.
Thank you. I just wondered if you had any comments about the current mayor of Tehran, and is he seen as the rising star, and does he have, what would be his potential to change anything?
Do you want to start with the micro and move to the macro?
The mayor, Ghalibaf, was one of the candidates for presidency in the past elections, and he lost it. He aspires to be president at the next elections. I'm not sure whether the hardliners are going to be allowing that or are too happy with him anyway. So we will have to wait and see, basically. I really don't give it that much chance or hope. Hardliners have got the power. They're going to stick to it. They're not going to allow anybody else to take it away from them. That's my general view. On the American elections front, there are two sides to this. It's Americans and the Iranians. Iranians, things haven't changed. Iranians are pretty sort of adamant that they don't want to have anything to do with the Americans, and with this system, the way it's going, there's no hope, and blah, blah. On the American side, you have the Democrats that seem to be also talking about holding talks. Obama, for example, saying that he wants to hold direct talks with Iran once he's in power. The Democrats may not be, the Republicans may not be as mad as George Bush is today, but I don't see a great deal of difference. Maybe they're not going to be starting a war with Iran, but I don't see any chance of opening with Iran either. Chances of talks with Iran, direct talks with Iran, leading to anything, I'm somewhat skeptical, having seen the last 27 years of relations between the two sides.
There is the one, I'm an optimist, but there is the one thing of the war. It's going to be very, very hard for America to exit Iraq without Iranian assistance. And the Iranians are already assisting.
They are assisting because for the time being their interests are concurrent, in a sense that Iran doesn't want a breakup of Iraq because that might land them with a neighbor, just like Saddam Hussein, that they don't want a Sunni hardline sort of thing. They don't want Iraq to descend into a civil war because they might get dragged in support of Shiites against the Sunnis being supported by other Arab countries, a regional war they don't want. They don't want the U.S. to remain in Iraq, to use Iraq as a stepping stone to attack Iran. So it's in Iranian interest to see the Americans go. They don't want a civil war in Iraq. They don't want to break up of Iraq. And the way it is, the system for the moment is fine. It's run by the Shiites who are brethren of these people in Tehran. There's nothing to complain about. So for the moment, things are going all right. I would assume that even the hardliners in Iran would like to see this continue and give the Americans a chance to escape.
Well, on your behalf, I'd like to thank Kasra Naji very, very warmly indeed. I thought when this event was advertised and when they asked me to come and interview him, it would be a very thin book. I thought, what can you really write about Ahmadinejad? But with a really fantastic quantity of research, you get a very, very interesting picture of a very curious fellow. I'm very grateful to you for talking to us. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Thanks very much.